My father refused to attend my wedding if my mother came because she had left with another man. Later. My mother. This is the hardest decision I've ever had to make in my life. I've always thought weddings were supposed to be a celebration. A joyous occasion to bring people together. But for me, it feels more like a battlefield where I'm stuck between two people I love, but can't seem to reconcile. My fiancé, Steve, and I are getting married in 8 months. We're young, yes, but we've been together for years, and our relationship is solid. We've been friends since childhood and only became a couple later on. Our bond is strong, and I think we're ready for this next step. We've gone through premarital counseling and financial planning. And while our wedding isn't going to be extravagant, we've put a lot of thought into it. We're having a small ceremony. Just the two of us with our best man and maid of honor. Then, we'll have a tiny reception with only about 50 guests. It's going to be an intimate celebration. Nothing fancy, and we're happy with that. But here's the problem. My parents, they can't stand each other. And it's not just a little discomfort, it's a huge, unresolved issue. My dad and my mom haven't gotten along for years. They're both hurt by everything that happened between them. And the mess that is their relationship is now affecting my wedding. 5 years ago, when I was finishing my last year of high school, my mother was caught having an affair with her married coworker. My world turned upside down. My dad, the man I knew to be confident and outgoing, became a shell of himself, quiet, withdrawn, depressed. It was like watching him lose the light in his eyes. It destroyed their marriage, and while I understand the gravity of what happened, it doesn't make it any easier to see him like this. My mother moved out, and my younger brother, who was only 15 at the time, and I decided to live with our dad full-time. Our relationship with her hasn't been the same since. I used to be very close with my mom, but after the affair, that relationship broke. My brother and I went no contact with her for nearly a year. I finally sent her an invitation to my high school graduation, but made it clear that her affair partner was not welcome. My brother took a bit longer to come around, but he occasionally talks to her now, though it's strained at best. As for my mom's affair partner, I refuse to even acknowledge him. I've never met him, and I have no intention of ever doing so. I made it clear to my mom that I don't want him involved in my life in any way. Whenever she tries to bring him up, I immediately change the subject. I don't know how things are going with them. And frankly, I don't care. On the other hand, my relationship with my dad, while closer than with my mom, is still full of tension. It's been 5 years since their divorce, and he hasn't moved on. He's not angry, but he's deeply sad. He hasn't dated anyone since their divorce, and he avoids speaking my mom's name, or even her partner's. It's heartbreaking to watch, but it also gets frustrating. He'll never be ready to forgive her, and honestly, I don't think he wants to. So, here's where my wedding comes in. I had told my dad about the plan, Steve, and I made for the ceremony and reception. We wanted to keep it simple, but of course, it meant figuring out the guest list, which led to the biggest issue, my mother. When I asked my dad how he felt about me inviting her, he became very quiet. He then asked if I planned on inviting her partner as well, and I made it clear that I wasn't inviting him. But I was still planning to invite my mom. That's when he told me that if she was coming, he couldn't come. He said maybe he could come before or after she showed up, but he couldn't be there if she was. I was crushed. I understand that my dad's pain runs deep, but this felt like an ultimatum I wasn't prepared for. I told him I'd think about it, but Steve and I needed to make a decision soon so we could start sending out save the dates. Steve, as always, was supportive. He told me that he would back me up no matter what, but he also made it clear that this was my decision to make. I couldn't help but feel like I was being forced to pick between my parents, and that's the hardest part of all of this. I talked it over with my brother too. He's blunt, and his view on the situation was pretty clear. He said, "It's rude not to invite her partner, but it's also rude to destroy two families with an affair. He can go to hell, and mom can shove wedding etiquette up her ass." As for her invitation, my brother said he'd show up, but he wouldn't make an effort to interact with her, beyond basic courtesies. He was fine with whatever decision I made, but he was not going to pretend that everything was fine. I know what my brother is saying is harsh, but it's hard not to agree. I don't want to punish my mother, but at the same time, I don't want her affair partner involved in my life. And I really don't think my dad should hold this over my head forever. I love my dad, and I know his pain is real, but it's been 5 years. Shouldn't he be moving on by now? Here's where I stand. Part of me wants to invite my mother. I don't want to cut her out completely. But her affair partner, never. I'm angry at my dad for not being willing to even attempt to reconcile with her in a civil way for a few hours at my wedding. Yes, it's painful, but it's also my wedding. This should be a day for me and Steve, not for my parents' unresolved issues. I'm upset that my dad is making me feel like his feelings are more important than mine. I understand his pain. But at some point, he has to face it and stop letting it control everything. But at the same time, I don't want to hurt my dad. I love him. And if I absolutely have to choose between my parents, I'll always pick him. We're close. And I don't want to jeopardize that relationship. My mom and I are never going to be as close as we were, but I don't want to shut her out completely either. I just don't know what to do. I feel like I'm stuck in the middle. And no matter what decision I make, someone is going to get hurt. I've been crying over this for days, trying to figure out what the right choice is. But right now, it feels like I'm on the edge of a breakdown. I don't know how to resolve this. I just want everyone to be happy. But it seems impossible. As the days passed after that heart-wrenching conversation with my dad, the weight of the situation only became heavier. I felt torn in two. Like I was being stretched between two worlds. One where I'm trying to be the dutiful daughter, and the other where I'm just trying to have a wedding that's about me and Steve, not about my parents' unresolved issues. I kept thinking about what my dad said about how he couldn't be in the same room as my mother, and it made me frustrated. 5 years. And he still couldn't bring himself to even be civil with her for a few hours at my wedding. It felt selfish, honestly. I understand that betrayal cuts deep, but he was acting as though he'd never moved past it. I couldn't help but feel like his sadness was holding me hostage. Like my happiness depended on his willingness to let go of his pain. I've always loved my dad, but it was becoming harder to ignore how he was handling everything. He had never tried to get help for his depression or the trauma of the divorce. Instead, he had buried himself in bitterness and sadness. And somehow, it seemed like my brother and I were expected to carry that weight. It was like he was using us as emotional shields to keep him from dealing with his own feelings. It wasn't fair. Steve, being the incredible person he is, kept telling me that no matter what decision I made, he was there for me, but even he could tell I was struggling. I could see the concern in his eyes, and I knew he hated seeing me torn between my parents. It was clear that my wedding day, which was supposed to be a joyous occasion, had become a battlefield, and I was stuck in the middle, trying to keep both sides from falling apart. I decided to turn to Reddit for some advice. I figured that talking to strangers who might have experienced something similar could offer me some clarity, but the more I read, the more upset I became. People kept telling me I was being a bridezilla and focusing too much on my wedding day, as if it was just about me getting my perfect day. But it's not just about the wedding. It's about the family dynamics that have been festering for years. Some users sympathized with my dad's pain and said it was understandable that he couldn't be around my mom, but others suggested I just rotate the seating arrangements so everyone could be happy. That sounded ridiculous to me. I wasn't going to go through all that effort to manage my parents like chess pieces just to keep the peace. I was so overwhelmed that Steve ended up telling me to get off Reddit, which was probably for the best. I was too emotional to process the conflicting opinions people were throwing at me. It felt like everyone had an opinion, but no one truly understood the complexity of the situation. I felt like I was drowning in advice that didn't help, and every new comment made me feel more lost than before. I didn't even know how to explain exactly why I was so upset anymore. It just felt wrong. All of it. The wedding was supposed to be a fresh start. A celebration of the love Steve and I had built together, but instead, it was all tangled up in the mess my parents had created years ago. Eventually, Steve suggested I reach out to the therapist I'd seen when my parents divorced. He was right. I needed help processing all of this. So I called her up. And despite finals being around the corner, I went to see her. And honestly, that session was a breakthrough. It was the first time I had been able to truly express how much pain I was still holding on to. I realized that, for the past 5 years, I had been living in a constant state of conflict, trying to protect my dad while ignoring how his behavior was affecting me. I had been so focused on his hurt that I completely overlooked how he had manipulated me into distancing myself from my mom. It wasn't an overt demand, but it was subtle. His sadness, his passive-aggressive comments, and the guilt he made me feel it had all chipped away at my own sense of what was right. I felt so angry at him for never seeking help for his depression. He had been wallowing in his pain for years, and it felt like I had been carrying the emotional burden for him. I loved my dad, but he was not innocent in all of this. Yes, my mom had an affair, and it was awful, but it didn't mean that my dad had handled everything perfectly. He had his own shortcomings too, and I needed to stop making excuses for him. This realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I knew that it was time for me to take control of the situation. I had to stop letting my dad's pain dictate my own. I had to make my own choices, even if it meant upsetting him. The tipping point came on graduation day. Once again, My parents were forced to sit on opposite sides of the bleachers, and I had to coordinate their movements via text message. It was embarrassing, honestly. I couldn't even enjoy my own graduation because I had to keep my phone on me at all times, making sure my mom and dad were separated. The whole day felt like a circus, and I just wanted it to end. The worst part was how my dad acted. He was texting me constantly, asking if my mom had left yet so he could approach me. It was childish. I couldn't even look in any one direction to see my family, and that was supposed to be a moment of celebration. Instead, it was just awkward, forced, and incredibly stressful. I didn't want to go to dinner with my dad after graduation, and I told him I felt sick. I just couldn't be around anyone anymore. Steve, as always, was there for me, holding me while I cried harder than I had in years. That night, I made another appointment with my therapist, and that's when everything started to shift. I realized I needed to stop making decisions based on my parents' hurt and start making them for myself. I needed to stop trying to fix everything. My therapy sessions helped me see that, while I had every right to be angry with my mom, I also had a right to love her. She made a huge mistake, but that didn't mean I had to cut her out of my life completely. And my dad, well, he needed to deal with his issues too. His passive-aggressive behavior had been subtly manipulating me for years, and it was time I stood up to it. He had caused me just as much pain as my mother had, but I had never really seen it that way until now. Steve and my therapist both pointed out that my dad had never sought help for his depression. He had projected his own pain onto me and my brother, making us feel responsible for his happiness. It wasn't healthy, and it wasn't fair to any of us. With these realizations, I decided it was time to confront both my parents. It was time to stop being in the middle. I had to choose for myself, and I knew that meant taking a hard stance with both of them. I didn't want to choose between them anymore, but I also knew that I couldn't keep letting their issues take precedence over my own happiness. And so, with a heavy heart, I called my mom and asked her to come over for tea. It was time to clear the air once and for all. When I called my mom and asked her to come over, I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me was terrified that I would open the floodgates to more conflict. But another part of me knew that I had to have this conversation. It had been 5 years since everything fell apart, and I had spent so much time trying to navigate this mess, without truly confronting it. It was time for that to change. Steve had already left to give us privacy, and I knew I needed to be completely honest with my mom. I had spent years suppressing my feelings, trying to keep the peace, trying to make everyone happy. But now, it was time to make the hard decision for myself, even if it hurt others in the process. When she arrived, I could tell she was anxious. I made us tea, and we sat down in my living room. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. But this time, I wasn't going to let that stop me. I had spent so long hiding from the truth, but now I was ready to face it head on. It was during this conversation that I realized how much I still loved my mom. I couldn't forget what she did, but I couldn't erase the memories of the good times either. She had been a great mother, even if she had made a terrible mistake. And in that moment, I knew that while I couldn't just pretend like everything was fine, I also couldn't shut her out completely. I told her everything that had been building up inside me, the resentment, the anger, the guilt I'd felt for still loving her. I told her that, while I would never be able to get back to the way things were before the affair, I also didn't want her to be completely out of my life. I had to set boundaries, but I also needed to stop punishing her for her mistakes. My mom listened quietly, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend herself. And when I finished, she took a deep breath and apologized. For the affair, for breaking the family apart, for hurting me and my brother. She admitted that her actions were selfish and that she had been weak. But she was genuinely sorry for how they had affected me. It was the first time in years that I felt like I was hearing the truth from her. Not just excuses. We talked for hours. And though it wasn't easy, it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. There was still a lot of healing to be done, but for the first time, I felt like I could move forward. I told her that I would invite her to my wedding, but there were conditions. Her boyfriend was not invited, and she needed to respect my father's boundaries. I made it clear that if she even tried to approach him, or any of his family members, she would be asked to leave. It was hard, but I needed to be firm. This was my day, and I couldn't allow any drama to overshadow it. My mom agreed without hesitation. She said that she understood completely, and would respect the boundaries I set. She even offered to skip the ceremony if it made things easier, but I insisted that she come. I wanted her there, despite everything. With that conversation behind me, I turned my attention to the wedding. I kept my mom and dad updated separately, letting each of them know the arrangements and the boundaries I had set. My dad, while initially resistant, agreed to come. He couldn't promise that he would be comfortable, but he said he would try. It was the first time in years that I saw a glimmer of the dad I remembered before the divorce, the dad who was self-aware and considerate of others. But I wasn't naive. I knew there would be tension, and I was prepared for it. My dad's new girlfriend, Linda, was a nice woman, and she was kind to everyone, including my mother. My mom came alone, which was a relief. The idea of her showing up with her boyfriend, especially after everything, was too much for me to handle. The night before the wedding, we had our rehearsal dinner, and I had arranged for my parents to sit at different tables. I wasn't sure what would happen, but something unexpected occurred. My dad approached my mom, extended his hand, and greeted her by her name for the first time in years. It was a small gesture, but it was a step toward healing. They exchanged pleasantries, and though it wasn't warm, it was civil. That was all I could hope for. The wedding day was beautiful. It wasn't the grand event I had once envisioned, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Steve and I exchanged vows in front of our closest friends, and everything felt right. The reception was low-key but filled with so much love. The best man gave a heartfelt speech, and my maid of honor was everything I could have asked for. It was a day I will always cherish. But the most unexpected moment came during the father-daughter dance. As my dad and I swayed to the music, he whispered in my ear, "I'm sorry for almost missing this. Thank you for not giving up on me." I pulled back and looked at him, seeing the tears in his eyes. He was finally starting to heal, and it made me realize how far we had come. When the dance ended, I pulled my mom onto the dance floor for an impromptu mother-daughter dance. It wasn't planned, but it felt right. We danced to a song we used to sing together when I was little, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. My mom whispered in my ear, "I never thought I'd get to do this again." It wasn't perfect, but it was a step forward. It was healing. Not just for me, but for my entire family. My brother, though still distant, was cordial with my mom. He even had a small conversation with her about his college classes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The most surprising moment came during the toasts. My dad stood up, glass in hand, and after saying lovely things about Steve and me, he did something I never expected. He turned to my mom and said, "I also want to thank Karen for raising such an incredible daughter and for teaching her the kind of forgiveness that I'm still learning." My mom gasped audibly, and several guests exchanged surprised glances. But the moment passed quickly, and I felt a sense of relief. The rest of the reception was joyous. Without any drama, Steve and I danced, cut the cake which he smashed in my face despite promising not to, and left the venue to a shower of rice and well wishes. It's been 2 months since the wedding, and things have slowly been improving. My dad and his girlfriend are still dating, and he seems much happier. My mom, on the other hand, has joined a support group for divorced women, and is focusing on rebuilding her life. As for Steve and me, we're settling into married life in our small apartment. It's not perfect, but after navigating the complexities of my family, the small, everyday problems feel simple and manageable. Looking back, I'm proud of how I handled everything. It wasn't easy, and it didn't go exactly as planned. But it was the best outcome I could have hoped for, and through it all, I realized something important. I can't control my parents' actions, but I can control how I choose to move forward. I chose to forgive, to heal, and to let go of the past. And in doing so, I created the future I wanted, with Steve by my side. It's hard to believe how much has changed in the last 8 months. When I look back at the tension, the uncertainty, and the difficult choices I had to make, I'm honestly proud of how things turned out. Even though it wasn't always easy, the wedding, despite all the complicated emotions that came with it, was the turning point that led to a new chapter in my life. One where I finally started to understand what it means to move forward. After the wedding, I thought things would go back to normal, or at least as normal as they could be after everything my family had been through. But, of course, healing is never linear. There were still moments of doubt, moments where I wondered if I had made the right choices, or if I had hurt someone in the process. But every time I talked to Steve or my brother, I felt reassured that I had done the right thing for me, and for my future with Steve. The most noticeable change after the wedding was my dad. I don't know if it was the event itself, or just the long buildup of his feelings, but he seemed different in the best way. The man who had been sad, withdrawn, and passive-aggressive for years now had a bit of a spark back in his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there, and it gave me hope. About 6 months before the wedding, my dad reached out to me. I wasn't expecting it, but he texted me and asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, feeling a mix of nerves and curiosity. When I saw him, I barely recognized him. He looked healthier, more vibrant. Like he had finally started to take care of himself. He admitted he had been seeing someone from his church. Not a therapist, like I had hoped, but still. It was progress. He told me that meeting her had helped him realize how much he had been wallowing in his pain. He was starting to see that he had used his hurt as a weapon, not just against my mom, but against me and my brother too. He had been holding us to this impossible standard, expecting us to choose him over her. And he admitted that it wasn't fair to either of us. He even apologized for the way he had treated us, for making us feel like we were responsible for his healing. That moment, sitting across from him at that coffee shop, felt like a breakthrough. My dad was finally taking responsibility for his own emotions. It wasn't all fixed, but it was a huge step forward. I had been so afraid that my dad would never forgive me for inviting my mom to the wedding. But when I asked him if he would come, he said yes. He told me he couldn't promise he would be comfortable around her, but that he would be there for me. And that's all I needed to hear. It was a relief to know that he was at least trying. I was ready to let go of the anger I had been holding on to for years, and his willingness to work through his own issues made me feel like it was possible for us to rebuild our relationship. As for my mom, things weren't perfect, but they were much better than they had been. After our conversation, where I had set clear boundaries, she respected them. She never pushed to include her boyfriend in anything, which I really appreciated. It showed me that she was willing to put her pride aside, for the sake of my happiness. And that was something I had never expected from her. About 2 months after that conversation, my mom and her boyfriend broke up. I didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer any. But I could see that she was starting to make changes in her life. She joined a support group for divorced women, and she seemed genuinely focused on rebuilding her life outside of her past mistakes. It was painful. Of course, there were still moments when I thought about everything that had happened, and I wished things had turned out differently. But I was learning to accept that people are imperfect. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means that you're willing to move forward, even when it's difficult. My mom came to the wedding alone, which was a relief. I had made it clear that her boyfriend wasn't invited, and she respected that. It wasn't easy, but she didn't argue or try to push boundaries. She even offered to skip the ceremony if it would make things easier, but I insisted that she come. She was my mom, and no matter what had happened, I wanted her there. The day of the wedding itself was more beautiful than I could have imagined. It wasn't the grand event that some people dream about, but it was perfect for us. It was intimate, and filled with so much love. Steve looked more handsome than I'd ever seen him, and I couldn't believe how lucky I was to be marrying him. We exchanged vows with just our closest friends present, and it felt like the world was finally in sync. But what really made the day unforgettable was what happened during the reception. I had been nervous about the dynamic between my parents, but surprisingly, my dad made an effort. He brought his new girlfriend, Linda, and she was kind and warm to everyone, even my mom. My mom, as promised, mingled with her side of the family, keeping her distance from my dad. It wasn't perfect, but it was a civil interaction, and that was enough for me. The most emotional moment came during the father-daughter dance. As we swayed to the music, my dad whispered, "I'm sorry for almost missing this. Thank you for not giving up on me." And that's when it hit me. All the years of pain, the years of carrying the weight of my parents' divorce on my shoulders, it was finally lifting. I could see the genuine emotion in my dad's eyes, and it was the first time in years that I felt like he was truly present. After the dance, I pulled my mom onto the floor for an impromptu mother-daughter dance. We danced to an old song that had once been our favorite, and I could feel the years of distance between us starting to melt away. It wasn't the way I had imagined it, but it was still special. It was a moment of healing, a moment where we could both just be together, without all the baggage of the past. It's been 2 months since the wedding now, and things are still in progress. My dad and his girlfriend are still going strong, and he's starting to show signs of healing. My mom has found a new sense of independence, and I'm proud of her for making those changes. Steve and I are settling into married life in our little apartment, and while we still have our typical couple struggles, dishes, budgeting, planning our future, it feels like a fresh start. For the first time in years, I'm not looking back at the past with resentment or anger. I'm looking forward, and that's exactly where I want to be. My therapist was right all along. Sometimes, the most difficult moments in life lead to the greatest healing. And though it wasn't easy, I've learned that forgiveness is as much about freeing myself as it is about freeing others. My family isn't perfect, but they are mine, and I'm choosing to move forward with them, not in spite of their flaws, but because of them. Steve and I are building a life together, and I know that whatever comes next, we'll handle it as a team. This isn't the end of the story, it's just the beginning. But for now, I'm happy. I've found peace with my past. And I'm excited for the future. And that's enough.